All right, so welcome everyone. I propose we get started. We have the honor today of having as our speaker Professor Vinod Subramaniam, who has a long history in our own field. He is originally in biophysics, and he was the director of AMOLF. And since then, he has been president of two universities, namely first of the VU and now of the University of Twente. And in addition to that, he has already for a long time had a strong interest in equity, diversity, and inclusion issues. And he is right now also chair of a ministerial committee that worries about equity, diversity, and inclusion in higher education. So with that, Vinod, I would like to give you the floor and thank you in advance very much for joining us.
Okay, thanks very much, Ralph, for the introduction. I'm going to see if I can share this presentation of mine. Yep. I'm going to see if I can do that. Yep. All right.
It always takes a little time.
It always takes a while. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Yes, I'm allowing it to share screen. Yesterday. I'm going to have to go out and come back in, folks. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, no worries.
On that note, Jake, it seems that lots of people are trying to join the Zoom. Russell just sent a message. Tana also just texted. And so there seem to have some problems with the link. Is there another link we can send them?
I think Russ is already here. I sent him the link.
Oh, okay, he got
the. If you click on the left little orange, there's a copy link that you can share with people. That seems to work.
Okay. Oh, I'll use that. Thank you.
Yeah, if the redirect, Tana is also here now, so I don't know what
Tana's got here now. Okay.
was happening.
All right, I'm back.
Hi, Vinod, there you are again. Thank you.
Now let's see if it works now. Oh yeah, it looks better. It looks much better. All right, here we go.
Yep, there you are.
Yeah, you can see a presentation, I think. Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. So, I mean, for those of you who just joined, I already started by saying that what I would like to do is actually have a chat about. I want to have an interactive conversation with you to the extent that it's possible. And I think it is possible after 2.5 years of Corona, we've learned it. So we should be able to do it. Yeah. As Ralph pointed out, one of the things I do now is I chair a committee that was appointed by the former Minister of Education, Culture and Science, Ingrid van Engelshoven, about diversity and inclusion in higher education and research. Yeah. And so we call it DHO. So I'm chair of this, and so I'm going to spend a little bit of time telling you a little bit about what our committee does. Yeah. But this is not a plug for the committee. That's not important. What I see in our landscape today is that I think we are as a community, as an academic community, and then you can break it down into the subfields that we all belong in. I'm a biophysicist, as Ralph pointed out, but this works in your field in astronomy and astrophysics as well. The academic community is intensely busy in the last couple of years with the notion of what we call diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think you use EDI. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, which permutation you use. I think the topic is exceedingly important. Some of the fields that we are in are, I think, more diverse than others. There's also a big question, I think, about whether we may be diverse, but we are not always inclusive. Okay, so that's something that is something that I think about a lot, or have to deal with a lot in an institutional context. But that may also be true in a let's say in the context of your field. Yeah, and that's something that I'd like to talk to you about, or hear from you, or learn from you about. That's one thing. The other thing is that there's a couple of other issues that are very much front and center on our radar as an academic community in the Netherlands, and that's the notion of recognition and rewards, in Dutch erkennen en waarderen, which is sort of, providing equitable sort of recognition and rewards for the various things that you do as an academic. Yeah, for a very long time, I think it has only been research focused, and there has been very little attention paid to what I call the core business of the university, which is actually educating young people. Yeah, if you only want to do research, you should probably be at a Max Planck Institute. That was what I used to say, still do say. But if you're at a university, it's part and parcel of being at a university is actually engaging with the young people, the next generation, and actually teaching them. I mean, I was educated in an American university, although I grew up in India. And I still remember, I mean, a couple of Nobel Prize winners who I had the privilege of working together with, they had to get permission from the dean to go to a conference during term time, because the first thing that you did was actually give your lectures, and that's actually in stark contrast to what I often see in our community here. And the other issue is one of social safety, and social safety is one that is playing out a lot. That is, we're seeing only the tip of the iceberg. At institutions, the Dutch institutions, and the tendency of institutions, and certainly universities, is to try to sort of neatly package these things into boxes and say, okay, we're going to deal with this one now, so it's social safety, so we're going to deal with that issue in a sort of, well-defined, well-bounded problem. I mean, these things are very, very complicated, and they're not well-defined, in that sense. And that when you think about social safety, very often it has an EDI component to it. Yeah, and it has very often a component of recognizing what someone is doing and rewarding them appropriately for it. Yeah. So all of these things that are sort of on our radar right now as institutions in the Netherlands, my argument is that we need to try to sort of integrate these better. Yeah, I don't think we're doing that well enough right now. And to the extent where I've advised the minister at some point to say that, listen, I think it's great that you're paying attention to these issues, but if you're going to do that by 3 separate committees that don't talk to each other, we're going the wrong way. Yeah. So as far as I'm concerned, I said, you can scrap my committee if you would like to. If you want to bring it under another umbrella, that's fine. Yeah. But make sure that you're trying to address this in an integrated fashion, because that's what we need as institutions, and that's what we need as a field. So actually, there's a question out there to you in the audience, is also to, and I'd like to ask about that. And we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. Yeah? Is how you feel about that, and how are you dealing with it at your own institutions? And I know there are people from the API and the UvA, but also from the RUG. So I'm curious how you're addressing that. These are not convenient topics that you can sort of put away into different boxes and deal with them separately. I mean, they have blurry edges and they sort of run into each other. So a little bit about about the committee. I mean, we have 10 people. I chair the committee. Marieke van den Brink from Nijmegen is a gender expert. Fadi Hanna is from the IPABO, so he brings in and the UvA and brings in an educational aspect expertise. Millie Kok is a diversity advisor at the Hogeschool van Rotterdam. Suzanne Lejeune is an expert in colonial history and is dean of the humanities faculty at the VU. Judy Messman is at Leiden, former dean of the AUC. Elena Pollard is a PhD student. Alexander Serebrenik is a professor in, oops, that was not the idea, yeah. At Eindhoven, Susanne Taube, who you have probably heard about in the news in the last week or 10 days, a colleague from the RU, and expertise in social safety. Khaled Tamimi is a student also at the UvA, actually. And Klaartje Vinkenberg, who has a great deal of expertise in EDI issues. Terms vary from between 1 year for the students to there are a couple of 3 or 4 members with 2-year terms, and then others with 3-year terms. So the first 3 years will be ending in September, and so we will be looking in the coming months for 2 or 3 more members to join the committee, and there'll be an announcement about that. So I just say that for now. How did this happen? The former minister came up with a national action plan, and it's I can provide later a link. If you go to dihoo.eu, that's the English website, and you'll see you can download the. I'll put it in the chat. You can get the plan and some of the things that we've written. So the elements of the plan, and this was, let me point out, this was written, of course, in 2019, launched during Corona in 2020. And this is a rapidly moving field, so things have changed. Yeah. So what was in the plan was, we wanted to come up. One of the things we wanted to do was come up with a format for an institutional diversity policy. It started out actually with a requirement from the EU that said that you need to have a gender policy. So we advised on that. Yeah, we interpreted our remit somewhat broader, and we said it shouldn't just be gender; it needs to be broader diversity. We did that, and of course, what you get when you do things like this as a committee, such as we are, you start getting political questions. So, it blew up in the parliament. But that's the reality of working in EDI issues, okay? So you need to develop a thick skin, and you need to be able to argue why you're doing something, and what the basis there is for recommendations, suggestions are, and a lot of it is actually scientifically based. There's plenty of literature out there, plenty of research out there that you can draw upon. And I don't have to tell most of you this. You probably know this already, but there are many other stakeholders in our ecosystem who need to be reminded of this. And so you need to keep that conversation going. It's something that we're trying to learn to do in an effective fashion. How do you engage with the parliament? How do you engage with the naysayers? How do you engage with others who have other opinions in a respectful but firm manner? That is a challenge, and it's you need to search you know, how you get there. We're still working on it. And you know, it's not going to go away. There's not going to be a magic wand that you can wave and say, okay, if we do it like this, it's all going to be okay. It's not. Yeah, because everything that we talk about in EDI issues usually raises a response, and in one way or the other. And that brings me to the second point, which one of the things that the plan really wanted to do was to also monitor. Now, if you want to create discussions and controversies, then you should talk about monitoring and sort of asking people, you know, where do you come from, etc., and or trying to figure out, why do we want to monitor? You want to monitor because at some point you want to know what you want, a snapshot of your community as it is now. And then a few years down the road, you want to be able to say, have we changed things? Yeah. You want to do that in a legal fashion. Yeah. According to the law of the land, you want to do that in an inclusive fashion. Yeah. And you want to make sure you're asking the right questions. As scientists, you want to make sure that the methodology of what you're doing, if you're doing a survey, is correct, so that it's actually statistically relevant. And you need to ask the right questions. Yeah? And look, we have plenty of academic colleagues who know how to do these things. You know, they know how to set up surveys, and they know how to do the methodology right, and also ask the right questions. But this is not just a research question. This is a political question. Yeah, this becomes so. Anytime you say you want to actually figure out what sort of your population is, you want to start counting things, and you know, people start getting nervous about it. So there was a couple of years ago, universities in the Randstad area, so actually Leiden, de VU, UvA, Utrecht, Erasmus. We wanted to actually use an instrument that's called the Cultural Barometer that was actually developed by CBS, and we were all ready to go and you know, provide the data, and then, as usual, parliamentary questions and so on and so forth. And then CBS changed the definitions, at which point it turns out that, you know, you can't really go forward with that argument. So that whole proposal basically collapsed. Yeah. We're 2 years further. We still don't have a monitor. We don't have a snapshot. Yeah. Erasmus University has actually done an internal survey, and this, they have they've been able to do it. This is something that we can try. We're trying to learn from them and to see if we can roll it out further. But one of the things that I've noticed is that you know, this is hard. So what you need to do is you need to actually have a top-down approach. So where we as executive boards or let's say an institute leader can basically say, look, we want to do this, but that is not going to work if that's the sole approach. You also need a bottom-up approach where you have to take your community along. Yeah, because look, let's face it, there will always be people in the community who say, look, I'm not comfortable with this. And that's okay. What you need to do is that you need to create an opt-in or an opt-out sort of approach. Actually, an opt-in is better. Yeah. So you want to create a survey of that is an opt-in, which gives people the chance to actually contribute to this. But the essence is that you have to scientifically and correctly develop that survey. Yeah, so you need to get the right people on board to create the methodology of the survey, to make it useful, and to have the right questions in it. Yeah.
Vinod, if I may interrupt, what was in the end, was the objection to this survey mostly kind of legal technical, like would it satisfy privacy constraints and things like that, or was it really just mostly political? Which one could read
it
as?
was largely, Ralph, it was largely a political discussion, and there is always an issue of privacy, yeah, that comes up in questions like this. But privacy, if you do it right, you can handle that. Yeah, you just have to do it right. I mean, the thing is that, at the UvA, for example, Saskia Bonjour is a political scientist who has actually done, together with the Young Academy, a number of surveys and things like that. So there are ways to do this. Yeah.
I mean, the US has been running anonymous surveys of their populations for decades now.
But this is exactly, I think, the point I wanted to also make. At some point, I think those of us who have been exposed to the U.S. academic system, and I was educated in the U.S., so I've seen this pretty much every damn survey that you come across. You take off in an anonymous fashion, where you identify yourself with, whether it's in case of gender or of your ethnicity or whatever. So it is possible. Yeah. But we're not that far ahead, in our discourse here in the Netherlands, we're not that far. Yeah. And I say, the US has the advantage of 50 years of affirmative action discussions. So that's okay. But anyway, we have a long way to go, but we'll get to that. So the three other things that were goals that were pointed out in that action plan: try to embed DE&I more effectively in existing instruments, and that some of it is very, very instrumental in terms that you want to make sure that DE&I is better represented in NWO calls and so on and so forth. But actually, you can draw that broader and basically say, look, are we a diverse and inclusive institution? If you're at the API, you can ask yourself the same question: are we diverse and inclusive enough? Yeah? And at all levels, right? And that's where I think you can also start thinking in terms of recognition and rewards. You can also ask the question in terms of saying, all right, are we now just looking at our scientific staff? Are we looking at our technical staff? Are we looking at support staff? How do you make sure that all of these buckets are talking to each other, and that we're looking at all, at all of these things? Right? Because again, the danger I see with recognition rewards right now, at some point, we're focusing only on the scientific staff. And that's good. But we're leaving out actually a very important part of our community, who are just as important, if not more important, in keeping us going. So those are the sorts of things that I think we need to be thinking about more. There was an ambition to maybe adopt or sign up to a European charter like Casper, or to adopt something like the Irish Athena, a number of charters that you could adapt to the Dutch context. That's not something that we've put priority on. We really spent a lot of time dealing with this, the gender diversity plan, and actually navigating the treacherous waters of monitoring. And, we haven't made it yet. The harbor is not yet in sight. And there was a call for a National Center of Excellence on Diversity. We also got all kinds of political backlash. And in the meantime, I think what we've recognized is that maybe that's no longer a relevant goal, actually, because, what you see is that every institution, every university has its own local context, and they have their own local expertise, and they have a different need, perhaps. Yeah. And we think it's better to just let, rather than making one sort of center, that you let the 14 universities basically develop their own expertise, and you do something virtual. They talk to each other. There's a network of diversity officers and diversity offices. And, let them talk to each other, because that's where the local context is something that is so extremely important. And I see this from my time in Amsterdam. I mean, there's 2 universities in Amsterdam, and I can tell you that the local context at the VU is very, very different from the local context at the UvA. And, they're 5 kilometers apart. It's a different culture. And so it's also an illusion to think that you can have a one-size-fits-all approach. There are some things that you can share with each other, but there's other things that you really have to engage with your community within your local context. Okay, that said, there's a number of partners who signed up to this. There's NWO signed up to this, the Research Council, KNW signed up to it, Universities of the Netherlands, LNWH, the Expertise Center for Diversity Policy, ECHO, LANDO, the PNN, the Network of PhD Candidates, and the postdocs, Postdoc NL. At that time, the Vereniging Hogescholen, the Association of Universities of Applied Science, had not signed up to it. They are now on board. And that's very important, because I think there's one of the things that we also need to realize is that in terms of EDI in higher education, the hogescholen or the universities of applied science have a far more diverse student population than most universities in the Netherlands. Yeah. So if you're talking about actually reaching diversity in the student population, you really need to have the hogescholen on board. Yeah. And we're not even touching things like the vocational schools like the MBO, where you see the diversity also is exceedingly a diverse student population. So I think it's also an illusion to think that if we think in terms of education, then we should be thinking about EDI only at the level of the universities and so on. I think you need to take it broader, yeah, but one step at a time. I'm very glad that the hogescholen are on board. So what's the role of the committee? The committee basically advises both the government and the sector on diversity and inclusion. Yeah, that's very broad. Yeah, but we are an advisory committee, and that means that we can give advice that is asked for or unasked. We can get basically we can and we do have an opinion about a lot of things. Yeah. What we're trying to do is to formulate measurable indicators and to really look at the action plan and say, okay, how do you take the ambitions in the action plan and sort of make it workable? I can tell you it's tough going. Yeah, it's tough going because it's for all the reasons I've already said. It's political. Yeah, and there's a lot of resistance. Yeah. On the other hand, what I do see is that at the level of the universities and at the level of our participating institutions, our students and staff want this. Yeah, I mean we are all saying, look, and the thing, of course, is there's very few things that are visible. Yeah, in terms of diversity. Yeah, the gender issue is one thing. You can say, okay, man, woman. You can maybe you can tell that. Color is the other thing, and disability. If somebody is in a wheelchair or it is an obvious disability, but there are so many other dimensions of diversity which are totally invisible, and we are not actually. You can't. We don't address all of that. Yeah. So I think one of the things that the challenge that is there for institutions like us is to really to acknowledge the fact that there is diversity in many different ways, and also in a very homogeneous looking group, you have diversity. I mean, and certainly at universities, I mean, you have diversity in the sense that you have kids who are starting kids, young men and women who are, or young people who are starting their first year, yeah, who have completely different histories. Yeah, and there are some students who understand what it is to go to a university because they have parents or siblings who have been to a university. And then you have first generation students who have nobody in their in their immediate environment who has any idea what it is like to be at a university or to study at a university, and so they have nobody to turn to if they run into trouble. And you can't tell that difference. You don't know who's first generation and who's not first generation unless you ask. And you know, there are things like, think about all of the other potential aspects, you know, whether it's sexual orientation, yeah, whether it is religion. I mean, you can tell from me, you look at me and say, well, yeah, this guy's probably not, you know, born in the Dutch polder. Yeah, that's a good guess. Yeah. But you can see that on me, yeah. But that's about it, right? And there's and it's pretty lonely. I can tell you that. I mean, that's my personal, yeah. And I see Veronica writes in the chat, if you're a first generation, you don't know that you don't know, and that's true. And that's why it's a responsibility, I think, for institutions like ours to actually set up programs for first generation students to say, hey, let's look, the transition from high school to university is already a step change. And if you don't know how to do it, it's even bigger. Yeah. So anyway, we're sort of diverting into the discussion. So what's our vision? You know, I mean, our starting point is that it is the social responsibility to it's our responsibility to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education and research. Yeah. Very often there is a argument that is made that, oh yeah, but it's all about quality, and as if diversity and inclusion doesn't lead to quality. Yeah, so that's why we also say it is inherently ensures quality. It's part of it. Yeah, that's the reason why we put that in there, because you otherwise, and I don't know about you, but you guys, I don't know if you recognize it, but I get it all the time. Yeah, but we go for the best. We go for quality. I was like, right. And we, as I said, you know, it refers to all the visible and invisible characteristics. But it's not just the characteristics, it's also the experiences and the backgrounds. Yeah. My experience is very different from that of many of you. I mean, I grew up in India, I studied in the United States, I worked in Germany, in the UK, and in the Netherlands. Yeah. That's just one facet of my journey. Yeah, and each one of you has your own story. Yeah, and that's you know, I mean, and you can take your CV and you can slice it and dice it in many different ways, and you will come up with different cross sections. Yeah, and depending on and that's why we include that word experiences and/or backgrounds. You know, because the experiences are what makes us. Yeah, and those are not things that you can easily, conveniently sort of, you know, define. And so, and by inclusion, what we mean is that we want to try to create an environment where everyone belongs and is seen, yeah, and participates as a matter of course, not as an exception. You can read this on the website, so I'm not going to, but I want to make those things clear. So that's sort of the philosophy that what we are trying to do. And why is this important? Yeah. What we do is when we think about a recommendation or we think about you know, a report that comes out, we ask ourselves, have all forms of diversity been taken into account? Yeah. Planning, implementation, evaluation of the effects. Does it contribute to belonging, being seen, and participation? Yeah. Each one of those is important. Yeah. So it's not just, you want to try to get all three of them. Does it combat institutional exclusion and prejudice? Do we really appreciate the diversity? Do we seek it out? Do we use it if it's there? Yeah. Is the approach sustainable, and is it collectively carried out? Yeah. I mean, these are things that one can all think about. You know, we came up with this, but you know, I'm sure you'll have variations of this in your own context. But and then we sort of asked the question, you know, does it fit the idea of being patient with the people, but impatient with the system, which is, you know, there's a systematic issue here, which you need to, and that we don't have to accept. But the system is also made up of people who need time and who have emotions, and you need to work with them. Yeah. So be patient with the people, but don't take a systemic issue for granted, and don't, and you know, so we challenge the system. You challenge people also, but you're patient with them. Okay, so what we try to do is to look at the long term and the short term. We try to work together with the sector, and we build on our knowledge, information. What we do is that we don't have all the expertise. Okay, we have a cross section of expertise, but within our group, I think we know who we can go to. So in a sense, if you come knock on our door, we can say, all right, oh yeah, we don't know how to do. We can give you 5 names where you should bang on. You know, that's something that we can do. And we are available for questions and advice. And we tend to spar with various organizations who ask and say, hey, can you help us with this? Can you think about this? So can you write a report, but can you help us think about this issue? Yeah, and that we do. Okay, so that was actually what I wanted to share a little bit about the committee, but on the way, I think I've also explained a number of the dilemmas that we face, yeah, and which I think most of you also probably face in your daily practice, yeah. I think, you know, given the fact that I'm talking to a bunch of folks in the astronomy and astrophysics field, I mean, you've had your challenges with social safety and so on over the last year. You know, I know that Samaya and colleagues at the UvA have also, you know, it's been a largely male-dominated field, and you know, there's changes happening, but it's pretty slow. Yeah, and then I think the question is, how do we get to where we want to go faster? But I think the question that I see and what I often see is that we don't actually know where we want to go necessarily, and that is the local context thing that varies. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing. Yeah, and so that we can see each other as a little bit more than just a postage stamp. And I'm afraid it's not going to help very much, but I will do it anyway. And then we can sort of have a chat about this. I don't know if you recognize some of this, if it kind of resonates or not, but you know.
Well, I have the feeling, Vinod, that a lot of this resonates very well. So thank you very much for your presentation so far. And yeah, let's first give Vinod an applause for the. And so who may I give the floor for opening the discussion?
I can try. I'm really interested in the sort of invisible diversity, because that is what really needs to be focused on next, whether it's your background, as you say, or being a first generation student, or what your family is like, or invisible disabilities and those sort of things. But again, like, how do you help if people wouldn't want to self-disclose, right? I suppose the answer is that you make it that the structural changes are good for the lowest common denominator. Make it everything so that it works for everyone.
Yeah, but that doesn't work really well, because so one of the things that I see is that what you can try to go for the lowest common denominator approach, right? But that usually means that you don't actually have the solutions you need. What I think is necessary, and it's easy to say this, very hard to do, is to sort of create an environment within your institutional setting or maybe a place somewhere where people feel safe, where they can go to and sort of say, hey, I need a bit of help because I'm running into this. Yeah. I tell you my own personal case. I mean, look, there's 14 universities here. Yeah. And that means there's 52, board members. Yeah. I'm the only one of color. Yeah. I'm the only one of color in the last. I mean, there was one guy, in Leiden, Paul Christian Flew, who was rector in the 40s, and he's a Surinamese tropical doctor. Yeah. Now, this country has a 450-year history of universities, right? So you do the math, right? It's very lonely. So from that perspective, and I said this to some of my colleagues in some interviews, I don't know, some meeting at some point, and they all went, whoa. And I'm going, what do you mean, whoa? This is my lived reality, yeah? But they didn't see it. They hadn't seen it. And I can imagine that is exactly the case for a lot of you. In whatever dimension you want to, whatever dimension of diversity it is. And that is something that you need to make, you need to be able to talk about this. Yeah. So in a sense, I think the answer to your question is, how do you do this? I think what you need to do is you need to find ways to make it possible to talk about these sorts of issues, within your, and I say that's why that local context is important, because the further away it is from you, the barrier of entry becomes exponentially higher. Yeah. So I mean, for the colleagues at the UvA, I'd say, okay, make sure you have something within API, yeah, where somebody feels like, okay, oh yeah, I can go there and talk to them about this, or I can go to this person for whatever reason, and however you do it, yeah. But you have to make a local solution. I see a hand from Ilse.
Yes. I have to slightly disagree with your points in this sense, because I know that Veronica is one of the initiators of Astronomons, which is an international group of women and mothers working in astronomy. And the reason that this works really well is because, unfortunately, most institutes still have only one or two working mothers in astronomy, especially in the more senior roles. So that immediately makes it extremely hard. And I've experienced this myself when my kids were younger. There was really nobody to talk to from that point of view. What is my experience with trying to raise kids and doing a scientific role at the same time? There was nobody there. So these international things, and even in a national level, I think they can be extremely valuable.
So I think you have a very fair point there, yeah. Because I think that and I agree with you there. I mean, what I'm trying to say is there are obviously certain dimensions which are simply not represented, yeah, within your local context, and then you know, it's an impossibility to say, okay, let's make an option to talk. That doesn't work. So then you go at a different aggregation level, and that's in this case something national or international. And I think what I see is that, yeah, you need, your mileage varies, you know, and so it's very context dependent, also not only your local context but also the context of the question. So I think from that point you're absolutely right, and that may be the solution, which is that you have to go national. I'll tell you a similar sort of thing that I see at the university. You know, when you're at a university, you know, we have confidential counselors at various faculties. You know? And what one sees is that it is very often the case that somebody who wants to talk to a confidential counselor will pick a confidential counselor at another faculty because they don't want to be dealing with a colleague in the same faculty. Yeah. So you want to give people the chance of going to a confidential counselor in your own faculty or in your own unit. But the chance that somebody actually does that is close to zero. Because if they have the option of going external or to another faculty, they tend to do that. Yeah, because there is a certain distance. Okay, so that speaks against my statement of, you know, you want to try to create something local. But I think there's a reason for this, because usually when you go to a confidential counselor, you already have a problem, you know, and so it's getting you to a conflict situation. Yeah. So you need both, you know, you need something locally where somebody feels that, you know, in terms of a EDI issue, that there is that's what the Dutch say, a luisterend oor, yeah, you know, somebody who listens, yeah. And I make the distinction between listening and hearing. There's a big difference. Yeah, and I think a lot of institutions have got things in place where people hear things. I'm not sure that they necessarily listen.
Yeah, I think, and I totally agree with that aspect. It's important to have these local conversations, especially to make people aware that these problems even exist. Because I can go talk to any other mother around the world, but that doesn't help me face the problems that I daily encounter in my local work environment. And we need to trigger the discussion. So you can, on the one hand, have a lot of support from people outside of your institute and use that support to generate more understanding locally in your institute and actually make the place a better place for people coming after you.
Yeah. Yeah, although, you know, the last bit of what you said, you know, you want to make it a better place for people who come after you. Yeah, it is so sad.
In a sense, yes, but
it is
as you said,
so sad.
It is a slow process.
No, it is a slow process, and I understand that, and it's something that we need to do. But for God's sake, we need to be doing things for the people who are there now, not just also for the people who come after us. Andrea.
Yeah, I wanted to share the experience. I'm in the physics and astronomy department at the VU, and we do have a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. But and I do recognize the importance of it. In fact, I can hardly believe that there is workplace environments that are more toxic than some of the conversation I've been witnessing. And it's incredible that this is not recognized. And it feels a little bit a gargantuan task to explain how, how much diversity, equity, and inclusion are important and relevant in our daily work life. And we feel very much isolated. So there is this bottom-up initiative where a few individual staff members within our department are gathering once a month and proposing initiatives and, you know, organizing trainings and discussing about procedures. But there's nothing above us. There's nothing from the faculty. There's nothing from the university. There is no general guidelines. There is no data, structurally maintained data that shows whether a policy is actually working or not. And so we're never validated on a top level, which means every initiative we take, we need to justify it and educate the people we have to talk to convince them that it's worthwhile, to convince them that, you know, this is an issue. And even though they don't feel that there is an issue, it may be due because they have never experienced it themselves. And this it can feel really, you know, breathtaking and kind of too much.
Yeah, no, but I recognize that, and look, I happen to know your department a little bit from a distance. That's sad to hear, because, you know, I mean, in the sense that one of the issues I think is that there's no data. I agree with you. There is no data, and that's partly the issue that I was saying earlier, is that we weren't able to monitor. Yeah? We were not able to get the data because, you know, we got shut down. Yeah? You can do some things sort of ad hoc and sort of under the radar, and that's fine. But that's not really what you want. What you want is something else. You're looking for something much. You know, look. The bottom line is we're all scientists and we're all bloody data-driven people, and we're saying, yo, come on, where's the data? And I want to know what it's like now, so that I can tell if things have changed in 6 months or in a year. But that means you need to have a robust experiment and a robust measurement that you can make over time. It has to be longitudinal, and we need to be able to see if our interventions actually make any difference at all. Yeah. And that has been very difficult because of this political monitoring discussion. That said, you can absolutely have the conversation. I think that there's a DEI office at the VU that has its heart in the right place. Maybe not, but it has to be. Andrea, what I always said is, you know, you can get, what my experience has been, that you can get sort of deans at the level of deans and so on, the top management, you can get people on board. I usually had no problem getting the people, sort of the, you know, the younger staff on board. Yeah, but what I call the leemlaag in Dutch, which is the hard-packed clay layer, that's usually at the level of department chairs. You know, that's where, and what you need is, you need to have help from sort of institutional leadership, and the young folks who are saying, you know, we're not taking this nonsense anymore, to sort of break through the let's say the more recalcitrant layers. Yeah, so that's something that I think we need to work on in a two-pronged approach. Yeah. And you mentioned that, you know, you're actually amazed at the level or the tone of some of the conversations that you're hearing around you. And yeah, you know, yeah, yes. At some time you're just sitting out there saying, wait a minute, you know, where am I? Is this a university? Is this my university? Yeah.
And if I may add to that, I've had colleagues explaining this conversation to me in the sense, explaining in these words, they don't see me as a colleague. And I think that explains a little bit how some of us feel whenever we are on the workplace. And it speaks to the importance of inclusion as a premise for diversity. It makes no sense to hire a diverse range of staff if then we treat them as a lesser staff, right? If we don't create the conditions for them to develop fully through their potential.
I agree with you in the sense that I think the institutional risk is sort of ticking the diversity box, but doing damn all about inclusion, because then all you've done is ticking the diversity box. Yeah, and in a sense, you know, this is what I said. You know, being lonely. You know, that happens. Yeah, and that is something that one really needs to work on in terms of saying, okay, I got invited to the party. Now is someone going to ask me to dance, right? Yeah. But Ralph also has a hand, so let me ask Ralph.
Yeah, there is another issue that I wanted to raise, and I think this whole business of whether you're allowed to measure your diversity or not is one example of it. That is that, of course, EDI discussions are extremely tricky and sensitive. And if there's one thing that both we and politicians are good at is arguing points of principle. I mean, you can basically derail any academic meeting on points of principle. So one of the things I also sometimes notice is that I have a feeling sometimes we're a little bit in the way of ourselves. I mean, almost anything you do in the area of EDI is negligent in some way or other, because you treat axes of diversity, sure, and you don't treat them all at the same time in the same way. Mm-hmm. And so we have very many occasions of letting perfection stand in the way of the very good. Yeah. And I'm sure you have experienced that also in the national committee. So I was wondering, do you have any practical guidelines there in terms of, how do you go from theoretical discussion to practical progress by making concrete improvements, even if they don't always address everything at the same time, right?
No, I mean, I'll tell you an example is actually quite simple in the sense that, I mean, what the EU required was a gender guideline. Yeah, you needed to have a gender diversity plan. Okay. So we addressed the gender diversity plan and we said, okay, we're going to be naughty, yeah, because we don't think you should really be thinking about one dimension of diversity. We're going to make it broader, all right? Mm-hmm. So if we had actually done what we should have done, we would have stopped there. But we just said, you know what, we're going to do it anyway, yeah, and we're going to stretch the boundaries, all right? If we had just written a gender diversity plan, Parliament would have clapped its hands and said, you guys have done great work. You've come up with what we need for, what we need to do in Horizon. But the fact that we decided we're going to sort of go beyond the remit and actually say what we think, which is that you really need to think about broader, intersectionality. We use the word intersectionality, so you got to think about other things. And man, the shit hit the fan, right? So, okay, you got to do that in the sense that the pragmatic thing that you do is you have to just take the risk sometimes. And what I say is, ask for forgiveness later rather than asking for permission first. Because I tell you, if you ask for permission, you're not going to get it. So we just do it. Yeah, and then, afterwards you got to, say, oh, sorry, we.
Yeah, and I just see that unfortunately the opposite also happens, right? So it also happens that you go you do something concrete or you try to, and then the reproach will be, oh, but you didn't think of A, B, C, and D as well.
No, but you know what? But Ralph, that happens all the time. Yeah, yes. Because I mean that happens all the time with everything that we do. Yeah. Yeah. And my standard response to that is, what? I'm not God. Yeah. I mean, this is what I could handle. My bandwidth was limited. This is what we did. Yeah. And you know what? Thank you for your comments. And the next time that we revise this, we'll take that, and that on board, because these things are living documents. Yeah. There is no such thing as as something that's done. A DE&I plan is a living document. Yeah. You have to, things change, and you got to change with the times. And for example, you noticed, when we started out, this plan was diversity and inclusion. Equity is nowhere in the picture. Yeah, yeah. So, but what you see is that the discourse has changed in the last 2 or 3 years, where equity is a much more integral part of the discussion. All right. So we'll change, we'll bring the notion of equity in there as well. Yeah, so we have to evolve with the times, and also to update these things. But I see a hand from Jake, and
Yeah, so sorry my voice is going, everybody. Well, is now actually coming back than it was, but I'm also the co-chair for the working group for the International Astronomical Union for Equity and Diversity, and there we have also this sort of gender and everything else thing. There is also a working group parallel to ours for women astronomy, and then we are the working group for equity, diversity, and inclusion in astronomy, so thus doing everything else. And the working group has now become the largest one in the International Astronomical Union. So we have more than 200 working group members, most of which are just members because they want to say that they're a member of it, but some people are actually members. And then that's then divided up into another 12 sub-working groups dealing with all of these separate things, because obviously we don't roll it all into one. But I think that's still a big manifestation of the overall attitude, is that there's like the gender thing at the cap, and we can look at this and deal with this easily, and then everything else becomes EDI. And then personally working in like the LGBT community, that's also every letter in the LGBT has different things to worry about in that as well. So
yeah, so you know that, and this is something worth recognizing, okay? Because every dimension of diversity, every one of them, yeah, and as you said, Jake, I mean, every letter in the LGBTIQ plus, and it keeps growing, is different, and so that context is very important to recognize. And the risk that we again run is that we start actually thinking only about the very narrow discussions, whereas everything is very intersectional. Yeah, and the point, of course, is, you know, I am a dark-skinned male, all right, of a certain origin, and I have, so there's all kinds of aspects associated with me. There's and that intersectionality becomes very, very important in sort of taking into account. When this whole thing started, right, when this whole diversity plan started, and I've seen this now at 2 institutions, yeah, when you try to sort of broaden the dialogue about EDI away from gender to a broader sense of thing, yeah, the response at first was one of panic that there would be less attention paid to the gender dimension.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, whereas in our field, certainly if you know in academic Netherlands or in physics and astronomy, we have a long way to go before we are at equity. Yeah, so there was a natural reaction saying, "Oh my God, does that mean that we are no longer going to focus on women in science, yeah, or women in physics or astronomy?" And that's a whole other conversation you have to have, yeah, which is to say,
surely,
no.
like the intersectionality is part of the problem with the gender imbalance. Like it has to be thought about. It can't just be like, hey, let's pick some women. You're going to get the women who already have more privilege, obviously, and it's just, that doesn't make any sense. It's very frustrating.
No, it is, but you know what it is, Veronica, is that, and this is something that actually is something that, if you're thinking about DEI, you have to understand that no matter what you do, yeah, there's going to be some group that is going to feel underserved, yeah, and you have to be, you know, that's where you have to be patient with the people, yeah, and say, hey, I understand where you're coming from, but we are not actually trying to limit, you know, diversity in your dimension. Yeah. Yeah. But that the system requires that we actually look further than just that one dimension alone. Yeah. And that, I think, is the critical issue. And I think, I mean, if I look at the people who are here on the, at least in my participants list, there's a very significant number of folks here who are not Dutch. Yeah, there are a good number of colleagues who are Dutch, but there's a significant number who are not Dutch. And I think, Andrea, I think that is maybe, and I don't want to fill in the words for you, but in a sense, what I hear you saying is also a little bit that is also part of the dimension, is that, you're not seen as a colleague. And that's not because you're not a damn good scientist, yeah, but it has something to do with where you're coming from. Yeah, and maybe that you don't necessarily speak the language. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but those are the things that I think, as institutions, we really need to take a look at. And this is a discussion, and let me tell you, that is currently playing out in Parliament and the Ministry, about internationalization. Yeah, I was with 4 of my colleagues with the Minister yesterday. This ain't going away fast. Yeah, and we've got something, we really have work to do here. Tana, you had a question or a comment?
Hi, Vinod. Amazing talk. Thank you so much. I agreed with pretty much everything that you had to say. So I work part-time as a postdoc at UFA, and then the other part of my time, I'm the Equity and Inclusion Officer for Dutch Astronomy. And your comment where you said, we talk about diversity and inclusion, but equity wasn't there. One of the things I asked in my job interview for this role was, why is it an equity and inclusion position and not a diversity, equity, and inclusion position? And one of the things that became very clear very quickly in our work that I've done with the NAEIC committee, many of whom are here, is that we need a lot of training on the basics of EDI, or social security, social safety rather, social justice, etc. And this kind of has led me to the next wave of realization, and I'd like you to weigh in on this, since you are kind of much more senior when it comes to EDI and social safety influence, and at the levels of power, is something that I've now very belatedly realized is a big thing that's a stumbling block for the practical work of EDI in the workplace and setting up social safety, is that everyone that does this work, at least in the astronomy EDI community in the Netherlands, is a volunteer except me. I get paid to do this. I only get paid to do it part-time, but everyone else is a volunteer, and it's not currently, for instance, a part of their work mandate or their work contract or their memorandum of understanding with the employer that this is something they're doing, and that, you know, contributes to burnout and all this, but it also helps to keep the status quo in place. And how do we move to a more kind of less casualization, more professionalization and compensation for the people doing this difficult, complicated, ongoing work?
So that goes back to actually the title of my talk, where I actually at some point said you need to look at these things in an integral fashion. And the thing that I think you need to include is the recognition and rewards. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is absolutely essential. Yeah, because I think this is precisely what is going on. Is that as we're volunteers, yeah, for the most part. Yeah, and when you come up for tenure, no one's going to have a look at this and say, oh you were a champion of EDI. They're like, oh, where's the paper? And I think this needs to change. Yeah, and I think that is why I find it so important that we say we take the EDI concept and social safety and recognition and reward, and that you weave it together. Because at some point, for a long time, in terms of sort of, recognition and rewards, it was also focused on primarily in terms of saying, okay, how do we get out of just a pure research focus and sort of actually give people credit for the teaching that they do and for the academic service. Yeah. And I think what you see is in the discussion right now about recognition and rewards. Yeah, you're getting more traction for education. Although when you think about it, the core business of a university is educating young people, period. It's not research. Yeah, I mean, I've had the conversation with a number of colleagues at the VU, who would say, hey, I got a big grant. I wanted to stop teaching. I said, you know what? I had my third year physics practical from a Nobel Prize winner, and my first year chemistry from a Nobel Prize winner. Who are you talking to? Go back home. Yeah, and if you want to scrap something, you can scrap some administration, but that's it. Yeah, you're not getting out of teaching. I mean, there's no way. But the conversation, that discussion is only just gone up from research to education. It has not yet actually taken into account other things. Yeah, I mean, I tell you what the other things that you guys are probably facing at all your institutions. There's people who are let's say, who are arguing against climate change and against fossil fuel companies and so on and so forth, right? Now, from a certain perspective, you can say that the activists who are working there are actually also contributing to our community. Yeah, are they going to get credit for that? Yeah, it's worth thinking about. Yeah. So whether you work about so I think, Tana, your question is a very relevant one, and I think what we need to do is within our system of trying to look at how we reward and recognize people, that we need to take these sorts of activities into account, and you have to give it, you have to give people who are involved in it some time to do it, and you have to recognize them for having contributed. So that's part of what I call the academic service. Yeah. Ralph?
Yeah, I feel a need to inject a bit of a note of positivity into this here. I mean, having been a director for 10 years, I have never dared advance any file for promotion without there being a very significant service record and a very significant teaching record. I mean, I would not deny that getting grants and doing good research is a very important component, but there has to be something significant to show on those other things as well, and it has been the case for quite a while. I think one of the things we are not very good at in Dutch universities is that, in a way, almost all committees are volunteer work, in the sense you are supposed to spend a certain amount of your time on service, but nobody really does any good accounting on how much time that really takes, or that would give you a good metric of deciding whether somebody is doing enough or not.
Yeah, but Ralph, I think you're right. Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, I mean, going back to what you were saying in terms of advancing a dossier for promotion. Yeah. What becomes important is that somebody like you as institute director actually, in a letter, basically is addressing all of these points, in a promotion letter, where you say, okay, what is this individual doing in education, or what have they done in education? What is the contributions in education? What are the contributions in research? What are the contributions in academic service? The fact that you're talking about that is a very positive one. Not everybody does that, and I've been in many tenure track committees or committees where very little is said about things like this. I tell you, one of the things that I can, it's an anecdote that I sat at the time when the Vici proposals were over all scientific disciplines, right? So I sat in that committee for 3-4 years, and it was one of these things, and there was an individual who had applied for a grant, or who was, and one of the comments on the committee was, but this person has only written a book. This is somebody from the humanities, and I just, and it's somebody who came out of one of the technical fields, and I had to say, I said, yeah, but wait a minute, you're now using your gauge on a field which lives in a completely different world. And this is a book that has been translated into 7 languages. Let me now venture to argue that this person has had more impact than pretty much anybody who has come before our community or our committee. Yeah, and there's this notion of understanding the context in which you're working. And you know what for me was actually an enormous eye-opener as rector of the FU was actually understanding how these different worlds, you know, how they work. Yeah, I mean, I'm trained as an engineer and a physicist. My world is completely different than that of the theologists or the or the humanities or social sciences, and so within that, you know, there's huge differences also within faculties, you know, and if you take law, for example, you know, Dutch law, completely different ballgame.
I mean, it is in a way a sad commentary on our community that we are so fragmented that we don't even understand the cultures of our own universities, like 500 meters away from where we work, right?
I would encourage people to go have a cup of coffee with somebody in another faculty. Yeah, I mean, Science Park, you know, there's not too many options. Yeah, but try it.
Yeah.
Samaya.
Samaya?
Yeah, sorry, I've been unmuted. Thank you, Jake. Yes, so thank you so much, Vinod, for that excellent, outstanding talk. I agree with Tana that I think everything you said resonated hugely with all of us. I had one question to you with regards, you discussed, for instance, the initiative that your committee has taken into monitoring. And I wondered, and also in some sense that in Dutch education or in education in the Netherlands, we are maybe 20, 30 years behind some of the discussions that took place in the US, given your experiences there. I wondered if there were any kind of actions or initiatives that you think we should explore in terms of implementing, obviously dependent on the local cultures and the different institutions.
But I think we should, you know.
Sorry.
I absolutely. I think what we really should do is to try to see if we can't learn. And that's what I was saying, you know, that we did sign up to a European Charter or something like that, you know. I mean, look, the UK and Ireland are also far ahead of the game. Yeah, I mean, this whole discourse is different in the Anglo-Saxon world. Yeah, I mean, you know, the notion of BAME colleagues in the UK, this is far ahead. Yeah? And you know, the research framework, it takes that into account. The Wellcome Trust takes it into account. The MRC takes it into account. So the EPSRC, all the research councils are doing this in a fairly systematic fashion. So frankly, I think we should, you know, get away from this not invented here attitude and just say, okay, you know, they're doing it well. Maybe we should just steal their ideas and implement it here. Because frankly, you know, there's no value in sort of reinventing the wheel. You know, it's been bloody around for millions of years. So what's the point?
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. I mean, one thing I noticed in my work in EDI in continental Europe is, you know, immediately this comment, but we're not the US, we're not the UK.
Yeah,
yes,
that's fine. But that's fine. And, you know, we're not the US and we're not the UK. And what you shouldn't do is to sort of import a US context or a UK context. I tell you, look, all Dutch universities have experimented with tenure track in the last 6 to 10 years, yeah, and pretty much all of them are going to go away from tenure track as well, because, you know, it doesn't work in this context. Why doesn't it work in this context? It's because we bloody imported it from the US without tweaking it. You know, we just said, okay, pick it up here and boom, it doesn't work. You have a totally different context, yeah. So I think that's the lesson you learn. Yeah, is that yes, we're not the UK and we're not the US. We have our local color and we have a different, but there's nothing that says you cannot use elements of the principles that belong in a system elsewhere and tweak it to fit in your system. That's what I would do.
Yeah, as a fellow British person and also a fellow have worked in America for a long time person, I'm all over that. And I think the problem now coming here to the Netherlands, now I'll be nasty to Dutch people, is also how it's really where the situation is coming from. So I think in the US and the UK, you see this bad problem. And so then you're better at measuring it and collecting this data and dealing with things, because in society, we sort of see this problem. While in the Netherlands, I think the societal problem may be less and less impactful. It's certainly, I think, a more inclusive society than many, many US states. And then I think this dilutes down to the problem that you then be like, okay, let's stop measuring it. I know we're working on another European grant that's looking at people coming from secondary school to university and getting degrees. And now we have equity in male and female in the Netherlands who are degree qualified adults. And the Netherlands solution to this is like, okay, now stop measuring it.
But Jake, this is a very important point, because I mean, I think one thing that people forget is the following. We as a society in the Netherlands have a population that is about, at this stage, I think 2020, about 22%, 24% that doesn't have a Dutch background.
Yeah.
In 2040, it's going to be 40%. Yeah.
In Groningen, we're already about 40% international population.
Leaving out the international population, let's just say, just in terms of, if you look at people with Dutch passports, okay, you're going to find that you're going to have within the foreseeable future, the demographics of this country is going to change dramatically. And people need to wake up and smell the coffee. This is real. It is now. It's happening. Yeah, and it's not just a small issue, which you can sort of sweep under the carpet. And the other thing is that we signed up as a country very enthusiastically to the European experiment. Yeah, and that means that you also have responsibilities by treaty, by law, by all kinds of things, also to the European experiment. And I think that goes back to also what Andrea was saying in terms of, at some point you have to also really embrace the colleagues that you have in your department who are from elsewhere. Yeah, they're not there because they're an excuse for a diversity quota or something. They're there because they're damn good. Yeah, and they're the best in a selection procedure. So I would just embrace that and sort of really make it happen.
And I'm here because I want to be. Because I want to be part of the EU is why that I'm not working in the UK and working in Europe, so that I retain my residency rights in the EU.
Yeah.
I hope that our country will continue that embracing with our students as well, right? That's a tricky discussion right now that you alluded to.
Man, I can have sleepless nights on this issue. But okay, but that's another discussion, and I hope that reason prevails, but I don't know. Sometimes, I wonder. Andrea.
I just wanted to say that I think one message that I take away, and I think I will also bring it in within my department, is that the lack of data is not only sloppy, it's enabling and perpetuating a status quo. Yeah. And so opposing gathering of data is taking an action against this.
So exactly. And the lack of data and sort of not engaging in monitoring at whatever level and is actually it is exactly what you said. Yeah. And the fact that, it's an excuse. And very often there is an excuse that, oh yeah, we can't do it because of privacy. And that's bullshit,
But maybe also to add a lighter tone, you were mentioning a couple of times the role of international staff. We had once a staff meeting in which the sentence "Dutch PhD students are the best" was uttered. And when I challenged that statement, someone else was like, "Oh yeah, you're right. German PhD students are also very good." I was like, I don't think that was the point that I was trying to make.
No,
we have a long way ahead.
It is. We do have a long way ahead. Yeah, but on the other hand, the fact that we are having this conversation is a good sign.
Yeah, and
I tell you, 15 years ago when I started here, or I started here 19 years ago, this kind of conversation wasn't there. Yeah, I can tell you that.
Yeah, I personally thought that the conversation we had about tenure track and the fact that people were actually sensitive to the argument that this is far too stressful led to a change. So there's also, sometimes it does help. Yeah. I wonder whether the US will ever find this out, because I think the tenure track system is just as broken there as it is here.
It is, but I'll tell you what the difference is. Is the US, of course, is a much larger system. Yeah, you have 4,000 institutions, instead of 14. Yeah, and you have 4,000 institutions at very different levels. Yeah, so if you don't get tenure at Harvard, you'll get tenure at Michigan without a problem. And if you don't get tenure at Michigan, you go to Michigan State or one of the other things. So that's not the I think there's the huge difference. Yeah.
But you burn up people in the same way. Even
but Ralph, you're absolutely right. From the people perspective, you're just as damaging. All right. But the system is much bigger, and what you see is that you have gradations, and so people can make choices in terms of saying, you know what, I'm not going to go for a Ivy League institution or whatever you want to call it, but I'm going to go to another institution where other expectations are there. Whereas in our system, all 13 universities, and including the Open University, have basically the same, the same sort of, level. And that's a total. That's a different discussion.
No, that's true. The old joke, of course, has always been that tenure track at Harvard always leads to tenure, but not usually at Harvard.
Not usually at Harvard, exactly.
Anyway, on that maybe lighter note, I have to be the strict chairman for a moment and note that we have been occupying your time for an hour and a half, and some people are having to leave. So is there any final burning comment or question that anybody has? Okay, well, I said that in exactly the right way. I'm sorry. So anyway, let me thank you again very much, Vinod, for your very good talk and your very stimulating discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for engaging with me. I think that's what's important. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you so much, Vinod. And I hope you'll come back and give a talk. Sorry for my cough, in a couple of years as well.
Yeah.
Very happy to. So, just bang on me. Ralph knows to find me. You guys know to find me. Just find me.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Thanks very much. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah.